Good morning, everyone, and good morning to anyone who's listening to us. I've been teaching distance class, and I'm used to welcoming people that I can't see. This is New Direction in Identity Modification, looking at consumer products as modifiers of identities. And Rohan is my collaborator. Rohan, can you raise your hand in case people don't know who you are? So you can direct questions to him if you want, as well as me. So what we sought to answer were these two questions. How does salient consumer products, by salient means everyone's probably wearing consumer products since nobody appears to be without clothes today, but products that are standing out modify the affective impressions of identities, and more specifically, are products, traits, and emotions all part of the same identity modification process? And just to give you a little background here, so is it Averitt? Okay, I've been saying it wrong for years. Thank you. So Averitt and Heiss first looked at these modifier equations, as Lynn talked about just a little bit. And what they found is that you can basically combine identities along with traits. They had some other things that might not be considered traits into a modified identity. A few years later, Heiss and Thomas did the same thing with emotion and found that those were very similar to traits. And so we have these modifier equations that work for traits or for emotions. So what we're doing is we're really saying, well, what about a product? What about a physical object that can be presumably purchased, so consumer product? How would that work? Okay, so I want to give you just a little bit of background to the larger project, and the reason I'm doing this is because traits and emotions are fundamentally different than products, right? Traits and emotions are dispositional. They tell someone about your internal attributions of that person, whereas products are external. You purchase them, you have them, you display them. And so we need to think about whether these are even considered in the same realm. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but that's what I want everyone to keep in mind. So one thing is that consumer products relate to the self and to identities through symbolic meaning. So this comes from a symbolic interactionist perspective, that products relate to the self and that products relate to identities. And I'll just leave it at that. The second thing is that consumer products elicit emotion, and people imbue products with affect. So there's a number of studies that say people get very emotional when purchasing products. They purchase products based on emotional decisions. And likewise, from Osgood's work all the way to our work, we found that people will actually have no problem rating products on EPNA. And then the last one, I think this is particularly important with these not being dispositional traits and emotions, is that consumer products are displayed to manage and form impressions. So there's a literature on products and impression management. Goffman talked about them as props, but you would imagine that most props are consumer products, and that there's impression formation. When people see a certain product, they automatically assume certain things about the person who has that and about the product. It forms impression. Okay, so that's the background. First study, which we've already published, was sort of a proof of concept study where we wanted to look at business identities and technology products to see, is there any chance that they can actually modify identities? So what we did is we came up with 6 business identities which had slightly different EPAs from one another. We didn't cover the entire perspective, and 12 technology products. With the technology products, we're looking at some cars, some phones, and some cell phones, cars, and computers. And we differentiated them by whether it was a generic term or branded term, because that's a big deal in the consumer science literature, and by status. And then we crossed all those with each other, which gave us 72 combinations, or amalgamations, as Lynn likes to say, and that was 90 products. So we tested those. So what we would expect is that both the identity and the modifier in each dimension should affect the combined identity, or the amalgamated identity. And we found that that was true for all 3 dimensions. You'll notice I am using this color scheme, and I'm hoping that everyone in a few years will be using this color scheme to refer to EPNA. We also wanted to say, well, okay, so those make a difference, but what about these brands? What about these different types? Maybe they make a big difference. Maybe products, each one is in a completely different realm. We found that they actually didn't make a difference, with the exception of the car compared to phones, and was actually quite higher in activity above and beyond the effects of the identity modifier. Okay, so then we tried something wild. We said, let's take these equations that Heiss and Thomas put together that were developed for emotions and traits. This is the combined one. And let's see if we can predict technology products with our data. So this was sort of our, okay, let's see what will happen here. So here's how this is set up. Scrooge, there's the evaluation for Scrooge. The purple line there is the evaluation for our 12 products. And the little circles there are the actual observed data, what people recorded for the modified. So the first one there would be a Scrooge with a Mustang. That's how people rated it. The X's are when we plug the two components into the equations. They do a pretty good job. Okay, well, what about potency? Evaluation always works. They do a pretty good job. What about activity? They do a pretty good job. In fact, across them, we get nearly a 9-point correlation between our predictions and observed. And this is on, business identities and products that are all rated positively. So we said, we've got something going here. Let's do a full study and develop our own equations. So that's what we did. Consumer products, full study. We expanded the consumer products away from just technologies, included vehicles. Well, vehicles are technologies, but separated those: house, clothing, recreation, and consumables. And we looked at all 8 octants as best we could, did a pilot test, and came up with a wide array of products that fit in those octants, at least with our pilot test sample. We did miss one octant, and you can talk to me later about that. That one's really hard to get. And so we had 52 products that we used that ranged in at least 7 of the octants, 58 identities from the previous affect control theory collections, and we crossed them doing a octant by octant cross and selecting products and identities from each selection, coming up with 212 combinations. Then we had 825 participants rate these, and we got plenty of ratings for each of them. Now, you might wonder, well, what do these look like? And this goes a little bit back to Lynn's issue about, sometimes the things that we put together don't always seem to fit. Some of them were a little bit weird, and we acknowledge that, but that's why we did a whole lot of them. And we also did try to make sure that we didn't use ones that would have weird meanings. So, for example, a pedestrian with Ferrari didn't make much sense. A gangster with a crib, as in a baby's crib, that actually crib changes meaning in that context. So we pre-screened these to make sure that there wasn't anything weird going on. But that's basically, this is one of our stimuli sets. Okay, so then what did we find? These are the R-squareds and the change of R-squared. I'm going to add in the identities, the modifiers, and then this is both our data set and the emotions data set combined. And then I'm going to add in the data sets as a dummy variable, and then the data set crossed with all the identity EPA and all the modifier EPA. So this will tell us whether the same thing is happening or whether really these data sets are getting completely different things. Okay, so obviously identity is important for the R-squared. We add the modifier in, we're up in about the 0.8 range in terms of R-squared. We add the data sets in. They do very little to increase our predictions, except for activity, 4% there. And then when we add the interactions, we get another 2%. So basically what we're seeing here is that combining these data sets, we see a 2 to 6%, depending on which dimension we're talking about, increase in predictability based on data set. So the same thing is basically going on in both data sets. So we produced an equation with it. And then this is my sort of qualitative analysis of the 3 equations. The trait equation from the Averett and Heiss paper, an emotion equation that we estimated the exact same way as the products equation, and then our products equation. And the emotions equation is very similar to the one that Heiss and Thomas put out. We just didn't use the exact same method as them. Okay, so these are the evaluation equations. You can see the numbers up there. I'm just going to point out the ones that really are sort of interesting, sort of differ between them. So for the modifiers, product evaluation has less influence than emotion and trait evaluation, according to those coefficients, which might be what we would expect. Again, products are not part of your disposition. They're not an internal state. They're something external. This is not too surprising. We also find some interesting things, but the interesting things actually come from the emotion equation. Here, the product and trait equation are quite similar, but the emotion potency has more influence than trait or product potency, which I find interesting. And here, there's a little bit of a difference, but products are right smack in between traits and emotions. So I don't think it's something to do with products. It seems to be sort of in the same range. Okay, well, what about potency? For potency, we again have, or not again, but we have sort of the opposite thing. Here, the modifier, the evaluation modifier, motion evaluation has more influence than product and trait evaluation. So emotion is the one that's different. So there's something going on there with the emotion equations, evaluation affecting potency and potency affecting evaluation. Again, for the same dimension, the potency modifier is quite a bit lower than the potency modifiers for traits or emotion. So again, we're seeing that dispositional external, internal aspects sort of come through. And finally, for the activity equations, this one was a little bit harder to interpret. I'll try three things here. So first of all, the identity term is actually quite a bit different. And I don't really know what this means, but identity activity has less influence on a modified identity's activity for products compared to emotions or traits. However, for the modifier, the one that stands out is the trait activity. In this case, emotion and products are very similar. So trait activity has more influence than product or emotion activity. Another way to look at these is combine these two and say, well, what do these mean together when we compare the magnitude of the activity coming from the identity versus the modifier? And here we could say that both traits and products have similar magnitudes, whereas for emotions, apparently the identity activity matters a lot more than the emotion activity. So I'm not quite sure how I interpret all these findings for activity. So to get back to the research questions, what did we basically find? In conclusion, we have to say that basically products modify identities very similarly to how traits and emotions modify them. The one systematic difference is that product modifiers seem to be have a lower coefficient, weaker influence, and I just put the coefficients back up here so that you could see them. So across all of them, you see that the products really have the lowest coefficients compared to both the trait and the emotion. And again, I think that's what we'd expect given that products are external, that you can use them, that you can replace them, that they don't tell as much about someone's internal state as someone emoting or a trait that you generally associate with that person. And I have a few implications. So one is that we're planning on modeling this process in Bayes ACT to show how identities influence product choices and product choices influence identity activation. So we think that there's some possibility. We've just done the initial analysis for this. So we think that there's some interesting possibility on thinking about how people choose products, or how people, given that they have certain products that are being displayed or that are known about, how they activate identities. I think that could be interesting. And this can obviously expand the ACT dictionaries and the types of simulations available to these objects, which have not traditionally been included. And obviously marketing, advertising, selling can be related to the effective meaning of products, but I don't think a lot of people have thought about what we're starting to think about, in that it's actually used in everyday life to reinforce and to create effective impressions and to change identities. And finally, we'd like to, in the future, relate this product meaning to self-meaning. Thank you.